So, Ben, can I welcome you to the podium? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
John, thank you very much indeed for your welcome and your introduction. It's great to see so many of you, not least quite a number of former choral and organ scholars, so some of whom I haven't seen for many, many years. So very good to see you and look forward to catching up indeed with everybody at the end of this, this short talk. For many, the image that comes to mind when thinking of choirs in Oxford is perhaps a candlelit chapel with a robed, possibly all-male choir singing Renaissance polyphony, or one of Herbert House's nostalgic settings of the Evening Canticles. The scene is seemingly timeless, a sense that this ritual has taken place in much the same form for hundreds of years, an atmosphere captured by the Mertonian poet T.S. Eliot in Little Gidding, the last of the 4 quartets. So, while the light fails on a winter's afternoon, in a secluded chapel, history is now, and England. But where did this thread of history begin? The musical lives are not just collegiate chapels, but also the aristocratic households, the chapel royal and the cathedrals of England blossomed in the 1300s and 1400s. Roger Bowers tells us that in the early 14th century, there may have been some 50 choral foundations, including boy choristers in England, but by the end of the 15th century, there were nearly 200. In Oxford, this period saw the establishment of the ancient choral foundations. In 1379, when founding the College of St Mary of Winchester, now known as New College in Oxford, William of Wykeham, the Bishop of Winchester, stipulated that there should be 3 clerks and 16 choristers. And that was a lavish and groundbreaking foundation at the time. For context, only 5 choristers were provided for at Hereford Cathedral and 10 at St Paul's Cathedral. The duties of this new choir were substantial. 9 services were sung each day as the full schedule of Catholic liturgy was observed, and the choristers were even tasked with making the fellows' beds. In return, the choristers were fed and taught Latin and grammar. A century later, another Bishop of Winchester, William of Waynflete, founded his College of St Mary Magdalene at Oxford. Influenced by the example of Wykeham, he decreed that there should be 8 lay clerks and 16 choristers in daily attendance in the college chapel, in order that the divine offices might, by God's grace, be performed with the greatest devotion, honour and perfection, to quote the college's original statutes. Oxford was therefore now home to the 2 largest choral foundations in the country. By this time, Merton College had already been educating scholars for over 200 centuries. Had Walter de Merton lived 100 or so years later, in the peak of this fertile period for English church music that had seen the founding of New and Magdalene, perhaps his inclusion of the advancement of religion in Merton College's statutes would have included some specific provision for music. Indeed, the first reference to singing at Merton is on the 2nd of June, 1489, around the time of Magdalene's founding, when it is noted in the college register that the fellows had agreed that there should be in the choir one of the chaplains more learned in chant, who should go by the name of precentor, whom the rest should obey in those things concerning the order and form of song in the choir. More decisions concerning the provision of music in chapel were recorded on the 30th of October, 1507. The college register states that those postmasters nominated by the 8 senior fellows were required to be able to sing plain chant, and the postmasters nominated by the remaining fellows were to be able to sing cantus fractus, a more rhythmic form of plain chant, which possibly included room for some kind of harmonization. In addition, a cantor was to be appointed on an annual stipend of 6 shillings 8 pence. And a note to the printed edition of the register identifies his post as a choirmaster. The timeline of the creation of Oxford's new choral foundations at New College and Magdalene runs in parallel with notable developments in the music. In the early medieval churches, church music had been plain song. By the early 14th century, in the most ambitious foundations, boys and men were singing polyphony in up to 5 parts. The Old Hall manuscript is the largest collection of English sacred music from this period and includes liturgical music by Lionel Power, as well as Henry IV and Henry V. A later addition to the collection includes a work by John Dunstable, regarded as the foremost English composer of the 15th century. Recent scholarship by Margaret Bent of All Souls and Rodney Thompson have connected Dunstable to Merton through his association with Merton's 14th century scientists, as evidenced by Dunstable's mention in contemporary mathematical and astronomical treatises. This penchant for astronomical and mathematical sciences is evidenced in Dunstable's musical compositions. His motet Veni Creata is an example of the isorhythmic motet, and even by today's standards, it's florid, complicated mathematical music. The music historian Frank Harrison believes this work was first sung at the Paris coronation of Henry VI in 1431. So we've been surrounded by some plain chant, the Veni Creata, and as you can see, it's not overly complicated. A lot of the moves are by step and so on, but Dunstable, when he takes this theme, gives it a rhythm in slower notes, which you can find initially in the top part and then in the bottom part, in the bass part, and over that places a much more fast-moving rhythmic pattern to the top parts. Now, I think some of the people in this room are probably on the recording that we're about to hear, which is recorded in Merton Chapel by the choir, conducted by Peter Phillips in what was one of our very earliest recordings. So this is music by John Dunstable, who we think is probably the first composer to have a connection with the college. This brings us to the next of Oxford's ancient choral foundations, the creation of the choir of Christ Church Cathedral. When Thomas Wolsey, the butcher's son from Ipswich, who rose to become the foremost courtier and advisor to Henry VIII, founded Cardinal College in Oxford in 1525, one of his first duties was to appoint the most important composer of the day, John Taverner, as the organist of his college chapel. The founding statutes of Cardinal College, in the pattern of New and Magdalen, allowed for 16 choristers and 30 singing priests. Less than a decade later, in 1532, after Wolsey's fall from grace and death, Cardinal College was refounded as King Henry VIII's College, later becoming Christ Church. The collegiate foundation dates from 1546 and makes provision for one organist and 8 lay clerks. There's also provision for a schoolmaster to educate the choristers. You can be sure that at Christ Church, the music of their organist John Taverner would have featured prominently. If Dunstable's music signposted the beginning of the English florid style, Taverner's music marks the end of that period. In this setting of Dum Transitit Sabbatum, you'll hear some of the finest English polyphony. Scored for 5 voices, alternating polyphony and plain chant, its long, flowing and graceful lines carry the story of the 3 women arriving at the empty tomb on Easter morning, bringing spices to anoint the body of Jesus. As in the Dunstable, the chant is present throughout, but it's a little bit more organized. It's in consistent notes. This isn't a very scholarly edition, so I'd like to apologize for that. But at least you can see the chant starting up there and then going into the tenor, just largely in minims, which is our kind of tactus which goes along. So here is Christ Church singing this music by their former organist in their recording venue of choice, the Chapel of Merton. All three of Oxford's ancient choral foundations continue to this day largely unchanged from their original intent. Even as the choirs in cathedrals and other collegiate foundations varied in size and standard, the choirs at New College and Magdalen maintained their treble line of 16 boys, and whilst they might sing fewer services now, you can still hear these choirs singing choral evensong 6 days a week during university term, using a repertoire spanning over 500 years. Meanwhile, the musical history of Merton Chapel remains something of a mystery. Despite the college archives cataloguing the wills of John and Mary Simpson from 1738 and 1775 respectively, bequeathing funds for establishing a choir and organ in the chapel, the official college history by Geoffrey Martin and Roger Highfield suggests that these wishes were not upheld and the funds misappropriated. They state that in 1790 to 1794, Merton even felt sufficiently self-confident to renew its dilapidated medieval hall. It diverted a bequest intended to establish an organ and set up a choir, and commissioned James Wyatt to undertake the work. What an outrageous decision by the fellows of the time. As it happened, Wyatt's hall didn't survive for very long, and it was replaced by the current hall by Gilbert Scott in the 1870s. Anecdotal evidence confirms that a choir was established eventually. An old member attending a Gaudy several decades ago recalled that prior to the Second World War, the college choir included boys from the city providing the treble line. I expect that following the war, the services were sung by men alone, as was common in many of the all-male colleges, until an enlightened development. Sopranos from the all-female colleges were invited to supplement the Merton men. By the time Laszlo Heltai, a Hungarian refugee, became director of music in 1960, women were regularly singing in the choir, and Heltai was fast becoming a highly regarded choral director. At his first rehearsal in Merton Chapel, he said, "You must teach me to speak English, and I shall teach you to sing." The standard of the choir improved enormously, and Heltai was spurred into establishing an even larger choir, not just for Merton, but for the wider university, named after his erstwhile teacher, Zoltan Kodály. The Kodály choir was for many years the largest non-audition choir in the university and played a part in Merton College's 700th anniversary celebrations in 1964, when Heltai directed the world premiere of Kodály's The Music Makers in the chapel. Laszlo Heltai's other major contribution to the music of the university was to establish a new chamber choir, actually at a time when chamber choirs were far and few between. It initially went by the Latin name Collegium Musicum Oxoniense before becoming Schola Cantorum of Oxford, a choir with which many Mertonians have and continue to sing. And given that this choir was founded at a meeting of Heltai and his student contemporaries in his Rose Lane room at Merton, it seems appropriate that Merton keeps its links with Schola. Schola Cantorum quickly made an impact on Oxford's musical scene and further afield, working with Michael Tippett, Yehudi Menuhin, and Leonard Bernstein in concerts and recordings. And fittingly, the choir offers the opportunity to work with a secular repertoire, which its members value as a contrast to the sacred works that they meet through their college choirs. One of the early members of Schola and of Merton's chapel choir was the soprano Emma Kirkby, who developed a great affection for the chapel, saying Merton Chapel is the most perfect place to be. Boasting the finest acoustic for unaccompanied choral singing in Oxford, the chapel became a favourite recording and concert venue for early music groups in the 1970s and 1980s. One of these groups was the Tallis Scholars, as popular in the UK as they are across the world. Merton remains their chosen recording venue, and here they are singing a section of Thomas Tallis's Spem in Alium in their iconic early 1980s recording. As many of you will know, the success or otherwise of a recording is no longer judged by the number of sales of a CD or a vinyl, but by the number of streams. Peter Phillips told me recently that he was amused that the inclusion of this recording as a soundtrack in the film 50 Shades of Grey caused a huge spike in the Tallis Scholars' streaming figures. Spem in Alium is in 40 parts, 8 choirs of 5 voices. It's thought to have been composed for the 40th birthday of Elizabeth I in 1573, and an early score resides in the Bodleian. And we pick up the recording roughly halfway through. The warden of Merton until 2010, Dame Jessica Rawson, often eavesdropped on the Tallis Scholars' annual recording sessions in chapel. Inspired by their singing and repertoire, she wondered whether the provision of choral music in the chapel could be expanded. And encouraged by chaplain Simon Jones and Peter Phillips, the director of the Tallis Scholars, Dame Jessica approached some benefactors who shared her vision. In October 2008, the college choir comprised 16 choral scholars. The newly endowed post of Reed Rubin Director of Music was created, and midweek choral services began. Peter Phillips's involvement attracted some attention, and quickly the choir received invitations to be part of the Cadogan Hall's choral series, to tour in France, and to record for Delphian Records. The college's 750th anniversary in 2014 provided the impetus for further developments. The existing organ, although well suited for early repertoire, struggled to accompany a full congregation and became mechanically quite unreliable. A new instrument was commissioned from Dobson pipe organ builders and installed in time for the 750th celebrations. It's, as you can see, a large eclectic instrument of 44 stops, successful in all periods of the organ repertoire, and has attracted players from all over the world, not least Olivier Latry, the organist of Notre Dame in Paris, who's visited on 2 occasions to give concerts. In 2010, Merton established a 3-day festival, Passiontide at Merton, with the aim of giving a platform to the choir, but also using it as an opportunity to invite professional ensembles to perform in the chapel. In recent years, we've hosted the King's Singers, the Cardinals' Music, Stile Antico, and this year, the Tallis Scholars. For the college choir, the high point is singing one of the Passions of Bach with a period orchestra and visiting soloists. And 16 years on, our festival has been described by the BBC as an unmissable event in Oxford's musical calendar. It was for the Passiontide Festival in 2014 that Gabriel Jackson composed The Passion of Our Lord Jesus Christ, an hour-long work in which Jackson sets texts from the Gospels and 2 Mertonian poets, Edmund Blunden and T.S. Eliot. It inhabits quite a different sound world, as you'll hear in the beginning of The Crucifixion. This new setting of the Passion was an important factor in developing the choir's reputation. We were invited to sing it in New York at Trinity Church on Wall Street, and our recording won the BBC Music Magazine Choral Award in 2020. The piece is also the most substantial composition in the Merton Choir Book, a collection of some 50 new choral pieces commissioned for the college's 750th anniversary. The choir book, as you can see, which exists in a single volume in the college library, includes all the major composers who were writing in 2014, from Judith Weir to James Macmillan and Jonathan Dove to John Tavener. One of the most technically advanced and musically avant-garde pieces in the choir book is Harrison Birtwhistle's Chorale Prelude. Birtwhistle was best known as an opera composer. He had written very little choral music and hardly any religious music. But however, just as John Dunstable's Veni Creata had a cantus firmus in a lower part over which there was more florid writing, Birtwhistle takes as his cantus firmus the Marian antiphon, the Ave Regina Caelorum, and sets Geoffrey Hill's poem, 2 chorale preludes on melodies of Paul Celan, around it. I would love to play you a recording of this work, but it's unbelievably difficult, and we haven't sung it since its premiere on St. Cecilia's Days, 2014. And I can see there's some people in this room who were there on that day and survived the experience. And I'll be always in their debt for getting us through it. So the first page of this you saw was Birtwhistle's manuscript, which is what he sent us to perform from. But quite quickly, we realized that wasn't going to happen. So it then came back in this rather better kind of state. But those copies are still in the library, but not often extracted. So if Birtwhistle's style is uncompromising, even when writing for student performers, Judith Weir's aim is to communicate to a wide public through her music. Her period as initially Master of the Queen's Music before becoming Master of the King's Music was very successful and included the composition of her Ave Regina Caelorum for the Merton Choir Book. It's an energetic and playful setting and is one of the pieces from the choir book that has been taken up by choirs from all over the world. And here's the beginning of that piece. Merton retains a relationship with a number of living composers, but not least through the new Creative Arts Fellowship and the recent residencies of Cheryl Frances Hode and Eloise Werner have been enormously productive. Over the last few years, the choir has continued to develop its life outside the choir stalls, and collaborations with some of the UK's most renowned orchestras have enabled the choir to expand its concert repertoire. This has included performances of the Bach Passions, the Mass in B minor, Handel's Messiah, the large-scale masses of Haydn and Mozart. Last year, the college began a residency with the Britten Sinfonia, pictured here, which has seen the choir perform with them in London and in Oxford, presenting music ranging from Bach to Stravinsky and Messiaen to Arvo Pärt. As part of this partnership, the Sinfonia's principal players have been coaching Merton's instrumentalists and chamber groups, resulting in an electrifying performance of Mendelssohn's Octet performed as a side-by-side project last autumn. And with Delphian Records, we've launched a new series of recordings with the Britten Sinfonia, exploring English choral works, often performed with organ, but originally conceived for orchestra and choir. The first disc in the series opens with Edward Bairstow's Blessed City, and here is an example of that track. When played on the organ, however brilliant the organist, the opening can sound quite clunky. When played by the strings of a fine orchestra, it sounds exuberant and thrilling. Now that the mixed voice choral scene has become so firmly established in the university, it seems incredible that until 12 years ago, there was no place for school-age girls to be part of Oxford's choral ecosystem. With the advent of Frieswide Voices, initially a peripatetic choir, which was eventually housed at Christchurch, and our girl choruses at Merton, girls now have something of the same experience that boys have enjoyed in Oxford for 650 years. Since 2016, 24 girl choristers have sung at Merton, complementing the work of our own undergraduate college choir by singing the services on Mondays and Wednesdays during the university term. This choir works differently to the boys' choirs at the ancient foundations. Our choristers attend a dozen different schools in Oxford and the surrounding area. And just as William of Wykeham's boys were taught Latin and grammar in return for their singing, Merton offers each chorister an instrumental bursary so that they can study an instrument of their choice in addition to the singing and theory lessons which take place at Merton. An equally important part of that education is the exposure to performance opportunities when the same standards demanded of a professional are expected of a child. The choristers have worked with the Philharmonia Orchestra and the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra in the Sheldonian and have joined with the college choir for recordings and broadcasts with the British Sinfonia. They have experienced the excitement of broadcasting live on Radio 3 and have given concerts in London and Paris. They have also sung more widely in the university. For example, last November, when their own choristers had clocked up the maximum number of working hours, New College asked if they could borrow our choristers for their Remembrance Sunday service. The choristers very much enjoyed the experience of singing with New College's lay clerks and choral scholars, although when they returned to Merton the next day, I think they appreciated the superior acoustic. This summer, as part of their 10th anniversary celebrations, the choristers will visit Leipzig to join the choir at Bach St. Thomas Choir School for a performance and will give their own concert in the St. Nicholas Church, one of the two churches of which Bach was choirmaster for 27 years. There's always an educational element to our chorister tours, and so we'll include a visit to the Bach Museum, where the original manuscripts are housed, and we'll see Mendelssohn's house and pay a visit to Bach's grave at St. Thomas Church. All these experiences contribute to the rich life of a chorister at Merton, which does so much to develop confidence as a musician, as an individual, and to build a sense of team camaraderie. Our choristers have the added advantage of being able to combine with the college choir for various performances when they experience the thrill of singing as part of a larger group, and this is something that the choristers always look forward to. An example of this can be found in our recent recording of Gabriel Jackson's The Christmas Story, an hour-long commissioned work from the college for our college choir and the girl choristers. And here is the climax of that work, the O Nata Lux. At the beginning of the track, you will hear an aleatoric phrase. Each girl chorister sings a passage in her own time and at a different time from all the other singers. Whilst doing that, the choristers are processing, 2 by 2, the full length of the chapel from the organ to the east end, where they eventually join the college choir and the orchestra in the climax of this piece. This music celebrates all that has been achieved at Merton in recent years and brings together both the choirs, instrumentalists, and you'll hear the full organ making an appearance too. And what of the wider choral life of Oxford today? With over 100 choirs in the city, there's now a far greater diversity of music making. The close harmony groups thrive, Out of the Blue, the Gargoyles, which has a particularly strong Merton contingent at the moment, and the all-female group In the Pink all enjoy a huge following, while community choirs in every suburb welcome singers of all ages without audition. The Oxford Bach Choir remains the largest choir in the city with its 160 members, including students, postdocs and senior academics, as well as local residents with no direct tie to the university. Now over 125 years old, the choir boasts a remarkable list of alumni: Margaret Thatcher, Dorothy L. Sayers and Edward Heath, to name but three. As many of you will remember, many forms of live music making takes place in Oxford every night during term. And that activity is to increase yet further now that the new Schwartzman Centre for the Humanities has opened. It houses 7 of the humanities faculties, the new AI Centre, and a 500-seat concert hall. The university has launched a new cultural programme developing relationships with orchestras, ensembles and artists, so that in time the Schwartzman Centre will become one of the busiest and most diverse art centres outside London. That programme opens this Saturday with an open house, the invitation encouraging everyone to come and explore what it means to be human in a complex world, in a place where, under one remarkable roof, academia and culture are breaking a new kind of common ground. The open house this weekend gives some idea of the scale of the ambition. There will be live music and theatre, poetry and spoken word, physical theatre and dance, an excerpt of Alice in Wonderland's The Mad Hatter's Tea Party, short films throughout the day in the cinema, and the Scottish Ensemble will perform in the new concert hall. The final event of the day will see the artist Ez Devlin and the composer Nico Muli join forces for 360 Vessels, a choral installation created especially for the occasion and performed by Schola Cantorum. The English choral tradition, particularly as exemplified in Oxford's collegiate system, has been described in the Washington Post by an English writer as the sound of our country. The tenor, Ian Bostridge, elaborates on this in another American publication and describes it as one of the great successes of English cultural diffusion, to rank with association football, cricket, and the works of William Shakespeare. That we have been able to develop and nourish that tradition at Merton over the last 2 decades has been a huge blessing to the life of the chapel and the college. As the choir and girl choristers look forward to the next 750 years, we can only hope that we can contribute further to this great tradition, not just in England, but across the world. Thank you very much.
Ben, thank you. That was wonderful. So I'm going to moderate this hybrid Q&A session now, and you may have to forgive me if it's slightly clunky, but a microphone will be passed around the room if anyone in the room has a question. And I'm eagerly watching for the first online question, which has not yet arrived, but please feel free to ask it. Do you know who's... No. And actually, as it's not appearing, I think I'd like to open it up to the room as well, if anyone has a question. Oh, here we are. What piece is top of your list for a future recording for the choir to be recorded in the chapel?
Well, at top of the list right now are the battle masses of Victoria and Guerro. So they both wrote a mass based on La Guerre, and which is a song of Janicat, and their settings are absolutely remarkable, and they can be performed in so many different ways. So we so often sing the masses of Lassus and Victoria with no accompaniment, and of course that works so beautifully in the chapel. But if you add instruments, sackbuts, viols, and so on, it creates a different colour altogether. And I don't think there's a recording that puts these two masses together. So that's what we're going to do in the summer. So it's something we've been working on for a long time, just gradually putting the music in our repertoire. But we'll spend 3 days at the end of June, kind of having some time getting used to singing it with the instruments, because there'll be all sorts of questions of temperament and so on. But I think that will be a really fascinating thing to do in our chapel. So that's the next thing. And then we're going to return to orchestral anthems, to volume 3. And there's a huge wealth of repertoire there that I keep finding in the bod and places. So
thank you. I should have added that question is posed anonymously, but possibly by somebody from Delphian Records.
Oh, okay. I see.
We have a question from David Turner online saying, what happened to the 1967 Walker organ when the Dobson was installed?
So the organ has been bought by somebody, and it's currently awaiting construction in a new venue. So we'll all look forward to going to see it and playing it and so on when it's up and running somewhere.
Can you say any more?
No.
Okay, thank you. I have another online question, but would anyone in the room like to chime in at this stage? No? In which case, again, anonymous. Anonymous says, no record company affiliation, it just came up as Anon. Thank you, Anon.
Yeah, so I was wondering, just in terms of the, thank you. I was wondering, just in terms of the girls' choir, how you see the competition on the issues to do with social media, and whether, you know, how easy it is to get the choristers to concentrate, to do all the things you want to do when there are so many outside pressure, whether you've seen that change over time.
Well, one of the great things for the girls, and something I think that they appreciate, is the fact that Merton is a no phone zone. And so they know when they arrive at the Porter's Lodge on a Monday and a Wednesday that they're completely free of all of that. And I think they really appreciate that, because the great thing about the choruses is they know the rules, they abide by them, and that gives them a framework. So I think they really value the 2.5 hours they have away from the rest of the world. And in fact, we recorded a recruitment video, and it was completely unscripted. I think you can find it on YouTube. And I think one of the girls at the beginning of that says something along those lines, that it just takes her out of her normal world for a few hours on those 2 days. So I think the fact that we have that policy, and it's a very clear policy, is a very good thing, because it means there are no distractions. And I have to say, I find that the girls' ability to concentrate is amazing, given they've had a long school day. They then come into chapel, and as most of you will know, it can be quite cold in there. They come into chapel and they're in there for, really quite a long time, rehearsing and then singing a service. And they maintain their focus in the most amazing way, really.
Ben, we work together and I see you every day, but I never really get to ask, other in a setting like this, what actually you do. But you're renowned, obviously, for the new compositions and breaking new ground with contemporary composers, for which the college choir has become renowned. But is it not the case also you find lost music? So I've just listened to the Bairstow earlier, and I've heard the choir with organ play the Bairstow, but wasn't the orchestral element of that kind of lost and found, and you kind of brought it back to us all?
So that was another piece by Bairstow, not the one we heard this evening, but on volume 2 of Orchestral Anthems, there is a piece called Lord, Thou Hast Been Our Refuge. And Bairstow wrote this during the Great War for a service at St. Paul's Cathedral. And the Musical Times carries a review of that service, which makes it absolutely clear it was sung by choir and orchestra, but it was published by Novello for choir and organ. So I knew there had to be a score. And I eventually found a lead which took me to the library at York Minster. and I booked my train ticket, made an appointment and so on. And then they emailed and said, don't bother coming, we can't find it. We went to the envelope where it's supposed to be and it was empty. So I asked if they would kindly just leave all of the materials out for me. They were in the papers of Francis Jackson, a former organist of the Minster and a pupil of Bairstow. So they left me his papers and I went through them, and 45 minutes later, it was in another envelope, along with a song cycle. There it was. So before I let the librarian know, I managed to take some photos on my iPad. And before I was back in Oxford, it was being typeset by somebody who works for OUP. And we then recorded it. So, and then broadcast it from the chapel. Yeah.
Ben, can I be allowed a question? I was fascinated by the Merton College Choir Book, which I think was one of the most exciting celebrations of our 750th. So at sort of 12 years remove, how many of the 50 are still performed and enjoyed?
So I think probably half a dozen pieces have really taken flight and performed all over this country, and in some cases much further afield. And a number of them have also been recorded by other choirs, including Sansara, which is represented tonight by their director, who's a former choral scholar and Mertonian. And I think Sansara have recorded the Judith Weir Ave Regina Caelorum. So I think that's not a bad hit rate for pieces to be taken into the repertoire of choirs all over the world. I think that's a really good thing. And in fact, I've been to a service at Westminster Abbey in the last year where there were 2 pieces from the Merton Choir Book in that same service. So that was rather lovely to hear. Having said that, I try and bring into our own repertoire at Merton several of those pieces each year that we haven't sung for a while. So we try to keep them turning over. So we're going to be taking one of the pieces to America in September that we haven't sung for many years. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you. And I agree. I think that's probably a very good strike rate, actually. I spend a bit of time helping people commission artists to paint portraits and so on. And I think sort of 1 in 10 is a huge success, and the others are sort of somewhere below success, you know. Anyway, any more questions online or in the room? Yep, at the back.
You mentioned the Schwartzman Center, this wonderful act of generosity. Could you tell us a little bit more about the concert hall? And did I hear correctly that your Matthew Passion will be performed there next year?
That's right. So the concert hall, and indeed much of the Schwartzman Center, the idea is that the local community as well as the university feels some sense of ownership of it. So running the kind of artistic side of things is the cultural programme, which is led by John Full-James, who comes to Oxford from Danish opera. And he and his colleagues have put together a remarkable programme. Now, within that is the opportunity for college choirs and so on to use the concert hall from time to time. So on Saturday, we have the first open house event, and the choir of Keble College will be singing with the Scottish Ensemble. And Schola Cantorum have a concert there during the term. And then Merton is going to be at the centre of the choral day, which is a kind of choral opening on the 4th of July. And that includes a concert in the Great Hall. So you've seen a picture of the concert hall, but as you walk into the Schwartzman Center, you are in the Great Hall, which is the great atrium, which has a number of galleries. And the choir will be giving a concert there with Eric Whittaker and the BBC Singers as the cultural programme are determined to kind of explore the kind of different acoustical possibilities of that space. And then later in the day, there'll be a performance of Carmina Burana with Merton and with our own girl choruses as well.
I was thrilled to go to one of the openings because we were thinking of choosing the architect for our new building at the National Gallery. And I'm thrilled to say that the seating in the concert hall is way more comfortable than the Sheldonian.
Oh, yes. Yes, and there's also a bar.
So I think in all sorts of ways it'll be a huge facility for Oxford. So we have online questions coming in thick and fast, actually. How does your time divide up in your role between things like rehearsing, planning, fundraising, organ practice, teaching, other college faculty commitments? I think probably from the bursar.
Well, I mean, every day is different, but every day includes some organ practice. Well, actually, it doesn't really, but it's supposed to. It's supposed to start with that, and then it includes some teaching and inevitably some administration and score learning and then choir. So yeah, I'm very lucky that each day is incredibly varied.
Thank you. And from Virginia Knight online, I've heard it's getting harder to recruit organ scholars for colleges. If so, what difference might that make to music in Oxford in future years?
I think that's something that each college is having to confront, and each college is different in this respect. So the ancient choral foundations all now have an assistant organist alongside some organ scholars. That's a model that we're looking at Merton, because you cannot rely on an organ scholar getting in. So whilst we want to do all we can to encourage applicants and so on, we have to be realistic that we have to have provision on the organ. So that side of it is slightly harder. I'm slightly more worried about a number of the other colleges where there isn't such a big chapel programme, and the role of the organ scholar is even more key because they run the choir. So that's something that I know a number of colleges are having to think about. One thing that they're looking at more proactively is the use of graduates in that role. And that's something that probably needs exploring.
Thanks, Ben. Time for one last question, if anyone has a question. No? Warden.
Thank you very much. I mean, one of my great pleasures as warden is not only to listen to the choir in the chapel, but then to accompany you on choir tours. And most recently, of course, we were in Japan before Christmas on quite an extensive choir tour. What do you think the role of choir tours is for Merton in particular? And maybe you could say, I know you've got sort of plans for the future, maybe you could say something about that. Is that something which you think is going to continue to be an important part of what we do and continue to strive to do in the college?
Yeah, so I think that the tours have, kind of multi-purpose in a sense. So on a very local level, they're very important for the choir, whether it's the girl choruses or the college choir, because you at last have an amount of time when you can rehearse without other distractions. And inevitably on tour, you might take one or two programs. That's actually much less music than you might sing in several weeks in Oxford. So the chance to refine our interpretations of a smaller amount of music is really valuable. There's then the whole social side and the choir bonding side. So for a choir to kind of be at the top of its game musically, you want them to get along and want to be with one another. So to have the chance to travel and to get to know each other better is incredibly valuable, particularly when you're able to do that without the context of the pressures of term. So that's really important. But then I think choirs can do a huge amount for the college and actually more widely the university, because it's a kind of shop window that you can actually take out and about. I don't think our rugby team is likely to go on tour. There are bits of college that you probably wouldn't, take all over the world. But I think a choir is something that, there's a kind of high ceiling to what you can achieve musically. So it means it's something that I think the college and the university can be proud to take out and about. And then, of course, they can be amazing ambassadors as individuals for the college and the university. And I think we saw something of that in Japan when there were inevitably a number of social occasions attached to the concerts we were giving. And the choir could be wonderful ambassadors for the students of Oxford. Our touring plans have been really kind of supported brilliantly by our benefactors, but also by our work with the Development Office. So in recent years, we've worked much more together to make sure that we're going to parts of the world where the development team would like to get to know our alumni better. And that's made a big difference. So because of that, we do have plans, for the next few years. And we're very lucky that in August, obviously, the choristers go to Germany, but in September, the college choir goes to Canada and the west and east coast of the USA, and so on. So that, I think, makes for a very exciting few months.
Thanks, Ben. Well, before I wind up and thank Ben, I wanted to thank Patrick Long. And Patrick, I don't know whether you've crept in at the back, but in which case I will thank him in his absence for the hospitality of Lazard this evening in their very swanky new headquarters, actually. And I wanted to lower the musical tone of the evening because actually I spent 10 very happy years living just next door. And when we adjourned to the terrace upstairs for drinks, you will see my old flat, which I acquired in a very mysterious process. The solicitor was acting for an anonymous vendor. And it turned out after a few months that it was Tom Jones's old flat. And I kept getting the odd bit of sort of fan mail to Tom Jones, and that's how it became clear who had owned it. So have a good look at Tom Jones's old penthouse. I'd also like to thank Grace Taylor-West and our fantastic development team for pulling this evening together. Mark, you must be congratulated as running, I think, the best development team in the whole university. And Grace, thank you for all you've done to make this evening work so smoothly. And finally, Ben, first of all, it's marvellous that you were holding up the flag for the humanities at a Merton London lecture. Quite often they're about sort of erudite physics and things like that. But this was a wonderful, accessible lecture, and I'm particularly happy to have been associated from the start with the choir and to hear your history of it and also your sort of personal highlights. And I think you must add to your long list of accomplishments that of being a brilliant lecturer. So thank you for this evening. And I know you'll be happy to answer some sort of more shy questions upstairs, but thank you.
Thank you very much.